experience where two have truly become one. God is at the center of us, our purpose and vision in His love. We dedicate our today, tomorrow, and always to You, our King. Bless and let there be love in our home. The marriage experience ordained by You alone. The marriage experience. The marriage experience ordained by You alone.
Welcome to the Marriage Experience program with Ayokunle and Bosede Santos, where they explore what it means to cultivate a God-centric marriage, delivering realistic and biblical wisdom, pointers and insights from couples and individuals on the marriage journey. Join them today as they continue the conversation around before the marriage covenant. Enjoy.
Welcome to episode 21 of the Marriage Experience program.
Yes, indeed. You're all welcome and looking forward to having another lovely time with you.
Absolutely. It's always a delight to
Indeed.
share this space and time with you.
It is the highlight of our week,
Absolutely.
actually.
Yeah. So last week we looked at how the personality traits we considered are used in conflict resolution. These include traits in ourselves and in our spouses. Let's just, recap or recall some of the nuggets from last week. We talked about misunderstandings that, they should not be dealt with in aggravation, with wounded pride or bad temper. And it should also, because all this will only just give the devil a foothold. We talked about, using the silent treatment.
Yes, we all know what the silent treatment
pouting,
is.
that these won't solve anything. It will only cause the disagreement to fester and, be prolonged unnecessarily. We also highlighted that during an argument or when strong words are being exchanged, don't wait to say your own bit and ignore what your spouse is trying to say. Rather, engage in active listening, which means that as partners in marriage, we need to learn the art of active listening.
Yeah, and of course, the active listening is not about just waiting for that gap where you can also bring
Just
in your
plug
own,
in your own
as
thing,
well. As of course you probably all know the saying that goes, you've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. So you want to actively listen, because there are times you already have a thought in mind of exactly what you're going to say, and only to discover eventually that
you may even be wrong.
You may not be. They may not be correct in that. Okay, so this week we'll be looking at red flags. Now, these are cautionary signs which present themselves before marriage, and these are signs which people tend to ignore, because of the rose-colored glasses they put on. So everything they see is good, But I often say,
they kind of make excuses that it's just because of what, it will go away.
So as I often say, that life indeed is a bed of roses, but these roses are also presented with their thorns.
Absolutely.
So though it all looks so good, and though it may all look so good at the very beginning, you also have to be aware that there are thorns. And it doesn't mean you stay away from the roses. It just means you ensure that you manage the situation properly. So though these signs are seen, sadly some fail to address them. And the question is why? They have the potential to develop into one lifelong cranky headache, if I may use that. Because if these things are not addressed or taken into cognizance at the beginning, then they tend to linger on and on and on.
And
now,
it appears women are often the offenders or, the culprits.
I didn't say that, but I wouldn't argue with that either. Exactly. And just as you said, women, not so much men, but more women make tend to make excuses even when things are so blatant, when things are so obvious to them, and they end up sweeping these things under the proverbial carpet, with tricky optimism, and that the man will change. But the question is, will that always happen, or will that ever happen? But we need to ask why this is so. Why is it that as human beings, in spite of seeing danger ahead and being warned about them, we still go ahead all the same?
I mean, let's remember that, this is a Christian marriage that we're trying to build here. So the fact that someone is a Christian doesn't mean that they still don't have issues. They still don't have areas of their lives that they're still growing in.
Yeah.
And these areas might be, where these red flags come from, that they actually need to be attended to.
Yeah. That leads me to, or rather reminds me of the question, that our first son asked when he was, I think, about 8 years old or so. This was after we had watched the documentary about lung cancer, and a doctor who was a heavy smoker was featured, and he was battling lung cancer. And our son said, he says, Daddy, he asked, he said, why do some doctors smoke? They know how bad it really is, to smoke. So why do doctors of all people smoke? And that was a very deep question. And that made me start thinking, about human behavior. Why is it that people who know what is wrong, people who really understand what is wrong, still go ahead all the same? Now, it's of course not an easy question to answer. As human beings are not machines. There are a lot of things to consider which make us take less than wise decisions and stick with them in spite of evidence, the evidence screaming at us. And it's a very deep question. That is a discussion outside the scope of this session. However, I will share a few proverbs which will lay the groundwork for later in-depth study on this subject. There is a Chinese proverb, which says that mistakes occur through haste, never through doing a thing leisurely. And I'll repeat that. Mistakes occur through haste, never through doing things leisurely. So what does that mean?
Kind of make haste slowly.
Exactly. You want to make haste slowly, right? There's an Estonian proverb which says, the mistakes of others are good teachers. In other words, I guess like that doctor, he would have been, even if he was not an oncologist, he would have been exposed to people who were battling cancer more than most of us.
I mean, that Estonian proverb is like
Exactly.
the Yoruba proverb that the person who falls in the pit, is teaching those coming behind, a lesson.
Yeah, of course, Yoruba is a language in Western Nigeria, for those who may not know that. And then finally, a Japanese proverb says, a man in love makes a pimple for a dimple. Mistakes a pimple for a dimple. And the first time I heard that, I just thought, this is actually true. Mistakes a pimple for a dimple. So these are things which we need to address. That the more we understand of ourselves and why we make mistakes, the more we're able to manage our affairs much, much better. And the final word, I would say, that comes from Proverbs chapter 19, verse 20. And it says, listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days. Listen to counsel and receive instruction. That means, though you may think you are right, though everything seems right now, but you want to listen to people, particularly people who have been through that process before you, that you may be wise in
or even
your
people
your
who are
latter days.
trying to point out, these red flags to you, because when we're in love, we tend to be tunnel visioned, and we don't often see things that other people see. And even when people are, trying to point things out to you that, have you noticed this? You may take it as, oh, they're just being jealous because, I'm in this relationship. They're not, depending on who those people are. Maybe they're friends, but what are the kind of red flags that can exist before marriage that people, may tend to overlook or just undermine? Some of them could be concerns about your partner's past history. And we'll flesh that out in a bit, but it could be concerns about their past history, about the history of mental or physical abuse.
And that abuse here is not just them carrying out the abuse, but having been abused themselves.
Either having been abused or witnessed abuse,
Yes.
At some point in time in their lives, and some behavioral issues, mental health issues that may play out as intense behavior. It could be stress, it could be anger, it could be depression, which they which they exhibit, and these could potentially deteriorate into violence, where it's the anger that's the issue, or even stress.
Yes.
That's the issue at hand.
And if I may come in here, when we're talking about all these red flags, they're usually results of deeper issues. So they're just symptoms,
Absolutely.
So it's always good to go deeper. Someone's done something wrong. You don't just whack them on the head and say you've been a bad boy or bad girl. You want to find out why. You want to find out why.
One of the things you like to say is, you ought to find out why what someone did made sense to them at that point in time. Another red flag could be individual habits, which could include disorders. It could be eating disorders. It could be addictions, even.
That's right,
that you've seen that they have a proclivity towards that kind of a thing, but you kind of just like, maybe it's not what I think it is, and you just live it, and
again,
rather than dealing with it.
That's seeing the evidence, but trying to sweep it under the carpet because it's not something you want to have to address.
And these habits could degenerate into obsessions. We're talking about sexual disposition. These are conversations that as a couple you really need to have before getting into marriage. And if once these things come up, this could actually mean or this could actually be a place to actually press the pause button, and say, what, let's deal with this stuff first. If you really truly want to go ahead with the marriage,
yes.
Let's deal with these things first, so that they don't become a mountain. They're molehills now, so they don't become a mountain in the future.
The pimple doesn't become a boil, or an abscess or
whatever,
something. Yes.
And also maybe unrealistic expectations about the future.
Yeah.
These are just a few of things that could show up as red flags.
You're listening to the Marriage Experience program with Ayokunle and Bosade Santos.
Okay, so let's take a look at how these red flags show up in relationships. Now, couples need to deal with these red flags and not just ignore them, as we've learned from Proverbs a few minutes ago. Now, the first red flag we're looking at will be past history. Past history, perhaps, the couples haven't entirely opened up to each other about their past. And there might be certain things in the past which, because these things have not been brought forward and they've not been exposed or they've not been discussed,
catch up to them.
It could or would catch up with them, in the future and cause that very heavy friction, which becomes very, very difficult to having to deal with. It could be, one of them may be feeling uncomfortable about a past issue, or perhaps maybe a hunch of something incomplete, or that is being kept from the past, that has been unsettled. For example, if one of them has been through some kind of, abuse, sexual abuse, for example, that particularly this tends to happen with the women, some kind of sexual abuse that would then affect them in marriage, so the husband starts wondering, why is she behaving this way? Why is she not opening up? Why is she so difficult? Or whatever. Now, if the husband is not aware of that past, then it becomes very difficult for it to be managed. Or it could also be, the fact that having considered this, one may then feel some things are unexplained or uncertain about the past, which then affects the future, because what they feel they do not know about the past affects the future. Absolutely. Affects the way they consider the future, affects the way they handle the future.
Yeah, and issues around mental and physical abuse. Maybe one of them came from a background where they saw one of their parents being abused emotionally. I mean, there are different types of abuse: emotional, physical, even financial, and such experiences build subconscious scar tissues. I mean, I call them scar tissues because they're there. It's like a callus that just won't go, and it's there in the memory of the victims. Right. I call them victims because they themselves are victims of, if they have witnessed this, and they may inadvertently also end up perpetrating this kind of abuse on their own partners.
Yeah. As the saying goes, hurt people.
Absolutely.
And that's where that comes from.
Yeah. And, where one of them also previously experienced abuse, like you were saying a while ago, the emotional wounds and the burden, or like a yoke, that's around their necks, need to be addressed. And, perhaps get help from healing counselors to help them move forward or manage their mindsets, more wholesomely.
Yeah. One thing we should point out here when we're talking about abuse, the general thoughts process or the picture that builds up in one's mind is the woman, and not just the woman, but being something that is done against, so an action against. Physical abuse being beaten, emotional abuse being this, but it could also be withdrawal of that good. So it's not just inflicting bad. It could also be with
emotional
abuse comes withdrawal of something good. A bit like the silent treatment, that is emotional abuse as well. So the silent treatment is not something where something bad is being said to somebody, but something good is being withheld, from being said to the person. Next, let's look at behavioral issues. Now, this is where one of the couple regularly or even once in a while behaves unbecomingly. This mustn't be overlooked, or it could develop into a cause of an unending friction as time goes on. We talked about this earlier on. You cannot just ignore certain behavioral flags or behavioral traits that you may have seen before you get married, because like I say, I'm not sure if anyone else says it, but when you're courting, you're given the best possible version of yourself.
Yeah.
You show the best possible version of yourself. I mean, it's like when you look at when cars are being advertised, you would always see the picture of the top of the range and then the quote of the bottom of the range. You wouldn't see it the other way around, because they want to create this beautiful picture of what it could be, but at the same time, we don't want to drive you away getting you scared with the cost of the car. So we give you the lowest of the range in the cars and the best of the range with the picture. So depending on the degree to which these things are pesky to the aggrieved person, they should discuss things and both parties respond with care and understanding. Respond with care and understanding. They must make a pledge to work on the concerning behavior. Now, work on this concerning behavior is not just about talking about it or addressing it. When you're working on something, first of all, you've got to identify it. You've got to acknowledge it. That's number one. Then you want to begin to find out the root causal factors. Why why am I feeling this way? Why is she or he feeling this way? And then you begin to work out, use tools, whatever tools you have available
That's
to you.
where empathy actually comes
Empathy
in. Yes.
is a very, 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 very good tool, because then
because if the person who's demonstrating this this annoying behavior, is not acknowledging to the person who feels that this behavior is annoying, and it's not going to work out,
right?
If they keep going, if they go forward, on that.
Now you came up yesterday with that word empathy, and it is a very, very powerful word indeed, because there are times it's easy to judge, and you go, well, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't have done that, etc., etc. But when you put yourself in that position, then you begin to understand why you're not giving excuses, you're not endorsing the behavior, but then you're beginning to understand why people behave in certain ways, because then that puts you in a better place to manage the situation better than you would have otherwise. So these behavioral issues, we've talked about a few red flags, and we will be addressing a number of them more later on. And we're looking forward to feedback from you concerning this discussion, because we believe it is very fundamental to not just to building up the marriage, but also continuing in marriage, because especially when you're talking about issues that have not been addressed, they don't just affect you today before you get married, they actually affect you for the rest of your lives.
Definitely. So, like we said, right at the very beginning of this program, I think was our first episode, this program is not just for married couples. It's for those who are desiring to be married as well. What's their journey and how are they developing? And I believe that this particular episode is more for those who are who are planning to be married, but even those who are already married, they are seeing these red flags. This is the time to actually deal with them, to address them, and to get them out of the way, so that they don't become something that they can't handle down the line. So next week we'll be continuing and looking again at some of the other red flags that we talked about, that I mentioned earlier on. We're going to be fleshing them out a little bit, and by no means do we completely deal with all these things. These are just inputs for couples to think about and to process, and just guide them in working out their relationship. So like we always say, we value your feedback, and we always look forward to you sending us your questions, your comments, your contributions to MXperience@lidiosantos.com. We all of our episodes are on YouTube at Marriage Experience, and we are also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and everywhere else that you listen to your podcasts.
So that's us today.
That's us for today. Remember, there is a replay on Wednesdays. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having us today. God bless you, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Join Ayokunle and Bosode again next week on the Marriage Experience as they bring God's truth to help you build your marriage God's way. Till then, remember, marriage is God's idea, and it is a good thing.
The marriage experience ordained by you.